The rope was thick, rough, and smelled like dust and regret. It was the last thing she would ever feel. They called her a poisoner, a thief, a killer. They said she'd murdered her boss, emptied his safe, and tried to disappear into the black of night like a coyote with a stolen chicken. Maybe she did. In a town like Dry Creek, truth was just whatever the loudest man in the room decided it was. And right now the loudest sound was the mob screaming for her to swing. The gallows was a joke, just a couple of crooked beams and a prayer, thrown up in the middle of the town square. But it would do the job. Eliza stood on the wooden crate, her wrists raw, her ankles screaming from the bite of iron shackles. Her dress, once a respectable cream cotton, was now a tapestry of dirt, blood, and the town's spit. A swollen eye was sealed shut, her hair a filthy curtain hiding a map of bruises on her cheek. She'd run out of tears hours ago. There was nothing left inside but a quiet, stubborn emptiness. Someone in the crowd, probably a friend of the man she supposedly killed, hurled a bottle. It shattered at her feet, a spray of brown glass against the dirt. "Should have let the wolves have her!" a woman shrieked from the back. "Burn the witch!" another man roared. The preacher droned on, his words lost in the wind. Sheriff Rudd, a man whose spine was made of greed and chewing tobacco, just watched, arms crossed, a matchstick dancing between his teeth. He didn't look at her. None of them did. It's easier to kill a thing than a person. The hangman, a drunkard with a graveyard cough, stepped forward. He reeked of cheap whiskey and cheaper morals. He slipped the noose over her head, his hands fumbling, his eyes looking anywhere but at hers. The rough hemp scraped against her skin. He tightened it. He stepped back. The crowd went silent. This was the moment, the final breath before the fall. The world slowed down. The dust motes in the air hung like tiny, unblinking stars. And then the world exploded. A sound like a thunderclap ripped through the square. Not thunder. Hooves. A massive black stallion, all muscle and fury, charged through the crowd, scattering people like chickens. On its back sat a figure carved from shadow and smoke. A long ash-gray duster. A wide-brimmed hat hiding a face that had seen the end of the world and wasn't impressed. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He raised a revolver, a long-barreled Colt that looked like an extension of his arm, and fired a single shot straight into the pale morning sky. The crack silenced every whisper, froze every man in his tracks. The world stopped. Then a voice like rocks grinding together cut through the silence. "Get your hands off my wife." Silence. Absolute deafening silence. The entire town of Dry Creek held its breath, staring at the rider. Sheriff Rudd finally found his voice, spitting the matchstick from his lips. "Who in the hell are you?" The stranger didn't answer him. His gaze, cold and hard as a winter river, was locked on the hangman. "I said," he growled, the words dripping with menace, "drop the rope." His revolver swiveled from the sky to the gallows, the black hole of the barrel promising a swift and messy end. The hangman's hands shot up as if he'd touched a hot stove. He stumbled back, away from Eliza, away from the noose, away from the ghost who had just ridden into their town. The stranger dismounted in one fluid motion, his boots hitting the ground with a thud that seemed to shake the very foundations of the gallows. He reached into his saddlebag, pulled out a folded piece of paper, and tossed it at the preacher's feet. It fluttered open in the dust. Even from the platform, Eliza could see the looping script in the official seal, a marriage certificate. Her name was on it, and his, Cain. The name was as sharp and brutal as the man himself. Her mind reeled. This was impossible. A lie. A trick. She'd never seen this man before in her life. She was a scullery maid, a no-name orphan. She wasn't anybody's wife. So why was her heart hammering against her ribs with a strange, terrifying flicker of hope? Cain didn't wait for permission. He moved with a predator's grace, climbing the steps to the gallows two at a time. The wood groaned under his weight. He stopped in front of her, so close she could smell the scent of leather, gunpowder, and the open road on him. "You all right?" he asked, his voice unexpectedly quiet, meant only for her. She couldn't answer. She couldn't even nod. The world was tilting, the edges going dark. Her knees gave out from under her, but she didn't fall. He caught her, scooping her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing. He turned, his body a shield around hers, and started back toward his horse. The town was still frozen, a tableau of shock and confusion. But some men don't stay frozen for long. A shot rang out. Not from Kane, from the crowd. A desperate townsman trying to be a hero. Kane moved faster than thought. He spun, his own revolver appearing in his hand as if by magic. A flash of fire, a roar of thunder. The shooter in the crowd dropped his rifle, clutching a shattered shoulder, his face a mask of agony. And just like that, the spell was broken. Chaos erupted, screams, shouts, the thunder of more gunshots ripping through the morning air. Kane didn't hesitate. He swung onto the black stallion, holding Eliza tight against his chest with one arm, his other hand already firing back into the crowd, not to kill, but to make them scatter, to make them afraid. And they were. Oh, they were. He kicked the horse hard, and the magnificent beast surged forward, a black arrow loosed from a bow of chaos. They tore through the square, dust and curses trailing behind them like a bridal train from hell. Bullets whizzed past their heads, one tearing a hole through the back of Kane's duster. He didn't even flinch, just bent lower, shielding her body with his. The rope on the gallows swung empty in the wind. The sun was a hot penny in the sky by the time they left Dry Creek choking on their dust. The stallion's hooves hammered a relentless rhythm against the cracked earth, carrying them farther and farther into the unforgiving wilderness. Eliza was slumped against Kane's chest, drifting in and out of consciousness, the world a blur of motion and the steady, solid beat of the stranger's heart against her ear. Behind them, a faint roar was building on the wind. The posse. Dry Creek wasn't the kind of town to let its prey escape. They were being hunted. Kane finally slowed the horse near a dry, rocky riverbed. He dismounted, lifting her down gently, and led the horse into the wash. He walked it backward for 100 yards, smoothing the tracks, then doubled back, heading west. He even dragged a spare blanket behind him for a while, kicking up a false trail of dust. He was a phantom, erasing his own path as he went. By midday, the heat was a physical weight, pressing down on them. They reached a narrow pass, hidden between jagged rock formations that looked like broken teeth. Tucked into a cleft in the stone was a small shadowed cave. Safety, for now. He laid her down on the cool, packed earth, pulled a canteen from his saddlebag, and dribbled a few drops of water onto her cracked lips. She coughed, her eyes fluttering open. When she saw him, the man named Kane, squatting in the mouth of the cave, silhouetted against the blinding sun, her breath caught in her throat. "Where?" Her voice was a raw whisper. "Safe," he said simply. His voice was rough but not unkind. "You're safe." She struggled to sit up, her body a symphony of aches. "Why?" she managed to ask. "Why did you do that? That paper. It wasn't real." He didn't answer immediately. He just stared out at the pass below, his eyes narrowed, scanning the horizon. "Real enough to make them hesitate," he finally said. "That's all that mattered." "But you called me your wife," she insisted, needing to understand. "You saved me. Why?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy and thick as the midday heat. Far in the distance, a cloud of dust was rising against the sky. The posse. They were closing in. Kane reached for the rifle strapped to his saddle, a battered Winchester that looked like it had seen 1,000 battles. He checked the chamber, his movements practiced and efficient. "We've got trouble," he said, his voice flat, all business now. But as he looked back out at the horizon, his expression tightened. Another dust cloud was rising, this one from the north. A different group, smaller, faster, black coats, black horses, not townsfolk, bounty hunters. Kane let out a low curse under his breath. He turned to her, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something other than cold control in his eyes. It looked like regret. "The men who paid to have you hang," he said, his voice a low growl, "must have heard I had a change of heart." Her blood ran cold. He was supposed to be there for a different reason. He wasn't her savior. He was the man they hired to kill her. The world tilted on its axis. The man who had pulled her from the noose, the man whose heartbeat she had felt against her cheek, was the same man who was supposed to put a bullet in her. The cave, which had felt like a sanctuary moments before, now felt like a tomb. "You," she whispered, the word catching in her throat. They hired you. Kane didn't deny it. He didn't even look at her. His entire focus was on the two groups of riders converging in the distance. Plans change, he muttered, as if that explained everything. He grabbed her arm, his grip firm but not painful. We have to move, now. I can't, she said, her body and her will giving out at the same time. I can't run anymore. You don't have to run, he said, pulling her to her feet. You just need to trust me. Trust him. The thought was insane. He was a killer for hire who had inexplicably decided not to kill her. But looking at the posse from Dry Creek in the pack of black-clad bounty hunters, she realized she didn't have another choice. Dying in the dust or dying by his side. It was all the same. He led her through a narrow fissure in the rock, a tight squeeze that opened up onto a high ledge overlooking the main pass. It was a perfect sniper's nest. He tied his horse deeper in the rocks, loosening the saddle to make it look like the animal had been abandoned in a hurry. Then he settled down behind a cluster of boulders, resting the long barrel of the Winchester on the stone. Stay down, he commanded, his voice a low whisper, and stay quiet. She huddled behind him, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The sound of hooves and angry voices grew closer. Soon 3 men crested the rise below them. 2 wore the dusty clothes of Dry Creek townsfolk. The third was one of the bounty hunters, a man with a cruel face and a silver-inlaid pistol. They saw the abandoned horse and slowed, cautious. He's got to be here somewhere, the bounty hunter snarled. Find him. The boss wants the girl's head, and the gunslingers to go with it. Kane didn't move a muscle. He was as still as the rock he leaned against. His breathing was slow, measured. He let the first man, one of the townsfolk, take a few steps forward, peering into the shadows. 1 breath. 2. Then Kane squeezed the trigger. The crack of the rifle was deafening in the enclosed space. The man below dropped like a puppet with its strings cut, a silent, crumpled heap in the dust. Panic. The other 2 scattered for cover, firing blindly into the rocks. A bullet ricocheted near Eliza's head with a high-pitched whine, and she squeezed her eyes shut. But Kane was already moving, working the rifle's bolt with lightning speed. He aimed, fired again. The bounty hunter, who had been scrambling behind a rock, was thrown backward as if punched by an invisible fist. He didn't get up. The last man, the second townsman, threw his gun down and fled, his boots skidding in the dirt as he scrambled back the way he came, screaming in terror. Kane didn't shoot again. He watched the man disappear over the ridge, then slowly lowered the Winchester. The silence that followed was heavier than the gunshots had been. Eliza stared at him, her eyes wide, her breathing ragged. He had just killed 2 men without a hint of emotion, as easily as swatting a fly. This wasn't a rescue. This was a war, and she was trapped in the middle of it with a man who was death incarnate. He finally turned to look at her, his eyes unreadable. I only fire, he said, his voice flat and cold, when I know what I'm aiming at. She said nothing. But in the ringing silence, surrounded by the smell of gunpowder and death, something shifted inside her. It wasn't trust. It wasn't gratitude. It was the terrifying understanding that the man who had saved her was more dangerous than the men who wanted her dead. And she had no idea which side he was really on. The canyon was a deep, winding scar of red stone, carved by centuries of wind and water. As the sun bled across the sky, painting the clouds in shades of copper and rust, Kane found a small sheltered alcove tucked between 2 massive cliffs. It was a place where the wind couldn't reach, a pocket of silence in the vast empty wilderness. He dismounted, lifting Eliza from the saddle. She was still weak, her body trembling with exhaustion and shock. He carried her to the alcove and set her down gently on a patch of soft sand. He handed her a blanket, then turned his attention to building a fire. Sparks flew from flint and steel, catching on a small bundle of dry kindling. Slowly, a steady flame grew, pushing back the encroaching shadows. Eliza sat with her knees drawn up to her chest, watching the flames dance. She hadn't spoken a word since the shootout at the pass. Her mind was a whirlwind of questions, each one more terrifying than the last. Kane sat across the fire from her, the flames casting shifting shadows across the hard planes of his face. He began to clean his rifle with methodical, practiced motions. Every movement was precise, deliberate. The firelight glinted off the long scar that ran down his neck, a white line against his weathered skin. Finally, she couldn't stand the silence any longer. She had to know. "You never answered me," she said, her voice hoarse. "Back in the cave. Why did you save me?" He didn't look up from his work. "I made a different choice." "That's not an answer," she pressed, a spark of her old fire returning. "That's an excuse." Kane paused his cleaning. He finally lifted his head and met her gaze across the flickering fire. "Because you didn't cry," he said. She frowned, confused. "What?" "At the gallows," he clarified, his voice low and steady. "When they dragged you through that mob, when they put that rope around your neck, you didn't beg, you didn't scream, you didn't cry." He leaned back, resting his arms on his knees. "The guilty always make noise. They plead, they bargain, they try to talk their way out of the inevitable. The innocent, the ones who know the truth, won't change anything. They go quiet." Eliza stared into the flames, the heat warming her face but doing nothing to thaw the chill in her soul. "I didn't cry because I knew no one would listen," she whispered. "Exactly," Kane said. "That's how I knew they were lying about you." A new silence fell, thicker and more complex than before. He knew she was innocent, but that just raised more questions. He was a hired gun. What did he care about innocence? "You know more about me than you should," she said, her voice barely a whisper. The pieces were starting to click into place in her mind, forming a picture she didn't want to see. "You knew my mother died of fever. You knew I worked at the Riverbend Laundry before I got the job with Mr. Abernathy. You knew about the burn scar on my left hand." She looked at him, her eyes accusing. "How did you know all that?" Kane stopped cleaning his rifle. He set it aside carefully. "I watched you for 12 days before the hanging," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. Her blood turned to ice in her veins. "I was hired to kill you," he stated, not as a confession, but as a simple, brutal fact. "A clean job. One shot from a distance. No witnesses." Eliza's breath hitched in her throat. She felt like she was back on the gallows, the rope tightening, squeezing the air from her lungs. "But I didn't do it," he continued, and now he looked at her, really looked at her, and his eyes weren't cold anymore. They were filled with a storm of conflict. "Because I saw how you lived. I saw you give the last of your bread to a starving stray dog. I saw you take a slap from the foreman for defending another laundry girl. I saw the fear in your boss Abernathy's eyes, and it wasn't fear of you." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "You were framed, Eliza. You were set up to die for a crime you didn't commit." That night she didn't sleep. She lay wrapped in the blanket, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The man lying a few feet away, his eyes closed but his senses alert, was both her executioner and her savior. He had held her life in his hands and, for a reason she couldn't comprehend, had chosen to let her live. Sometime in the dark hours before dawn, she decided she couldn't stay. She couldn't trust him. She rose silently, gathering her meager belongings. She reached for her torn, battered boots and stopped. Sitting beside them was a brand new pair. Soft leather, sturdy soles, and they looked to be exactly her size. On top of them was a small, folded scrap of paper. Her fingers trembled as she picked it up and unfolded it. "If you're going to run, at least do it comfortably." Her eyes shot to Kane. He hadn't moved. He was still lying by the dying fire, breathing evenly. Had he been awake the whole time? Had he known she would try to leave? She sank to her knees, the boots in one hand, the note in the other. A war raged inside her. He was a killer, a man who sold death for coin, but he was also the only person who had looked at her and seen the truth. She didn't put the boots on. When the first golden rays of dawn touched the canyon walls, she stood up, walked back to the fire, and sat across from him again. Kane opened his eyes. They were clear and calm. She met his gaze, her own resolve hardening. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. He gave the faintest of nods. "Didn't think you would." And in that moment, something shifted between them. Not trust, not yet, but the first fragile recognition that they were bound together by a secret that could get them both killed. The days that followed were a blur of rock and sun. They moved deeper into the wilderness, Cain always pushing, always watchful. He was a ghost in the landscape, reading the signs of the earth like a book. A broken twig, a disturbed stone, the flight of a bird, all of it told him a story of pursuit. He knew they were still being hunted. The bounty hunters weren't the kind to give up easily. They were wolves, and they had the scent. Eliza, meanwhile, was undergoing a transformation. The fear that had been her constant companion was slowly being burned away by the harsh sun and the even harsher realities of their situation. It was being replaced by something harder, something more resilient. One evening, as she was repacking their supplies, her hand brushed against Cain's duster, which was slung over a rock. She felt something stiff in the inner pocket. Curiosity, or maybe a deeper, nagging suspicion, made her reach inside. Her fingers closed around a small, yellowed envelope. It was sealed. Her name was written on the front in faded ink. Her stomach plummeted. Her hands trembled as she tore it open. Inside wasn't a letter. It was a formal contract, a kill order. Target, Eliza Miller. Payment, $500 gold coin. Paid upon completion. Special instructions. Make it look like an accident. No connection to the client. At the bottom of the page was a signature. Not a name, just two initials, elegantly penned. S.S.E. She barely heard Cain approach. He stepped into the firelight, a pair of rabbits slung over his shoulder. His eyes went from her face to the paper in her hand, and his expression became a mask of stone. He didn't flinch. He didn't offer an excuse. She didn't have to say a word. She just held it out to him. He dropped the rabbits, walked over, and took the paper from her shaking hand. He glanced at it, then folded it neatly and tucked it back into his coat. "You were hired to kill me," she said, her voice dangerously low. "For $500. "Yes," he replied, his voice level. A cold fury began to build in her chest. "How many others?" she asked, the words like ice. "How many names were on your list before mine?" He met her gaze without hesitation. 21. Her knees felt weak, but she refused to buckle. She would not show him weakness. Not now. "And I would have been number 22. "Yes." She stared at the man who had pulled her from a noose, fed her, protected her, and given her a pair of boots to run away in. A man who had done all that while carrying her death warrant in his pocket. "You watched me for 12 days, she said, her voice cracking despite her best efforts. "All that time." "I was trying to decide," he interrupted, his voice tight. "Decide what?" she cried, the question tearing from her throat. "Whether my life was worth $500? Cain took a step closer, and for the first time, she saw the full weight of the hell he lived in, reflected in his eyes. "I was deciding if you were someone who deserved to die," he said, his voice raw. He took a slow breath. "You weren't." The confession hung between them, more shocking than any lie he could have told. She looked away, her eyes burning with tears. Not of fear, but of a strange and terrible betrayal. She had known the world was cruel, but she never imagined its cruelty could be so methodical, so businesslike. Cain moved to his saddlebag, pulled the long-barreled Colt from its holster, and walked back to the fire. Without a word, he placed the heavy revolver on the flat rock that separated them. The firelight gleamed on the polished steel. "If you want this to end," he said quietly, "you can end it." Eliza's breath caught. Her eyes snapped from his face to the gun. It was right there. An easy reach. Justice, revenge, an end to the running. Cain stood perfectly still, his arms loose at his sides, unarmed, vulnerable. "I won't run," he said. "I won't stop you." For a long, agonizing moment, the world shrank to the space between them. The fire crackled. The wind whispered through the rocks. Eliza took a slow step forward. Her hand reached out, but she didn't touch the gun. Instead, her fingers closed around the kill order still lying on the rock. She picked it up and, looking straight into Cain's eyes, she tore it cleanly down the middle. He didn't move. She tore it again, and again, and again until all that was left were tiny, useless scraps. She let them flutter from her fingers, and the wind scattered them into the darkness like bitter snow. She looked up at him, her voice hoarse but steady. You didn't run. You didn't lie. You didn't shoot me when you had the chance. He gave the faintest nod, his eyes never leaving hers. She took the last shred of paper and dropped it into the heart of the fire. It curled, blackened, and vanished into ash. You saved me, Kane, she said, her voice gaining strength. Now you better be damn sure you keep doing it. A storm of emotions crossed his face. Surprise, respect, and something else she couldn't name. I plan to, he said, his voice quiet but firm. If you'll let me. She didn't smile, but something inside her, something that had been clenched tight with fear for weeks, finally began to uncoil. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was the foundation upon which trust could be built. It was a choice, and she had made it. The desert was a brutal teacher. It taught them the value of water, the meaning of shade, and the profound silence of a world untouched by man. Days blurred together, a relentless cycle of sun and wind that burned their skin and stripped away everything that wasn't essential. And in that crucible, Eliza changed. She learned to read the land the way Cain did, to find water where there seemed to be none, to make a meal out of roots and rabbit. She learned to be silent, to be patient, to be aware. He taught her how to shoot. It started with tin cans balanced on rocks. Her hands shook the first time she held the heavy Colt. The kick of it bruised her shoulder, and the roar of it made her flinch. But Cain was patient. He stood behind her, his hand over hers, showing her how to breathe, how to aim, how to squeeze the trigger instead of yanking it. Don't shoot to scare, he told her, his voice a low rumble in her ear. You shoot to stop. One shot. Make it count. Slowly her hands stopped shaking. Her aim improved. The tin cans danced in the dust, one after another. She was a natural. The focus required for it quieted the storm in her mind. When she was aiming, there was only the target, the gun, and her breath. Nothing else mattered. One night under a sky so full of stars it looked like spilled diamonds, she asked him about his past. Who were you before all this? Cain poked the fire with a stick, sending a shower of sparks into the darkness. A soldier first, he said, his eyes on the flames. Then a lawman. Then this. What happened? She asked gently. Why did you stop being a lawman? He was silent for a long time. The fire crackled, the only sound in the vast emptiness. Because I learned that sometimes the law and justice are two different things, he finally said. I put a man away, a powerful man named Silas Croft, had him dead to rights for fraud and murder. But he had money, he had friends in high places. He walked free. Cain's jaw tightened. A week later, my wife and daughter died in a house fire. The sheriff called it an accident. Eliza's heart ached for him. Suddenly, the scar on his neck, the haunted look in his eyes, the wall he kept around himself, it all made a terrible kind of sense. S.C., she whispered, the initials from the kill order burning in her memory. Silas Croft. He's the one who hired you. Cain nodded slowly, the firelight catching the pain in his eyes. He's been buying up land, silencing anyone who stands in his way. Your boss, Abernathy, must have found out something, so Croft had him killed and framed you for it. He hired me to tie up the loose end. But why did you take the job? She asked. If you knew what he was. I've been hunting him for 5 years, Cain said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. Taking the job was the only way to get close, to find out who his pawns were, to find the proof I needed to destroy him for good. I never intended to hurt you, Eliza. I was going to fake your death and get you away. And just like that, the final piece of the puzzle slotted into place. This wasn't just about her. It was about his past, his vengeance. And she was standing right in the middle of it. They were nearing the edge of the wastelands, the jagged peaks of the Dragoon Mountains rising in the distance, when the ambush came. It was fast, brutal, and professional. The crack of a single high-powered rifle echoed through the canyon. Cain jerked in the saddle, a dark stain blossoming on his left shoulder. He was knocked clean off his horse, hitting the sand with a heavy thud. Eliza screamed his name. Before she could react, 2 men stepped out from behind the rocks. Bounty hunters. One of them she recognized from the past. A man with a scarred face and cold, dead eyes. Mendez. Well, well, Mendez sneered, his rifle aimed squarely at Kane's chest. Look what the wind blew in. Drop your weapon, Gravehand. This time you stay down. Kane, groaning, tried to lift his revolver with his good hand, but he was too slow, his movements sluggish from the shock and pain. Mendez smiled, a cruel twisting of his lips. It's over. But he had made a fatal mistake. He had forgotten about Eliza. She didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She reacted. The Colt was in her hand before she was even aware of drawing it. She remembered Kane's words. Breathe. Aim. Squeeze. She aimed center mass and fired. The gun bucked in her hand, the sound a deafening roar. Mendez's eyes went wide with disbelief. A red circle appeared on his chest. He staggered back a step, then collapsed like a sack of grain, his rifle clattering on the rocks. The second bounty hunter, stunned, swung his gun toward her. Breathe, aim, squeeze. She fired again. The second man grunted, clutching his leg, and fell to the ground, howling in pain. Silence descended, a thick, awful silence broken only by the wounded man's moans and Kane's ragged breathing. Eliza stood frozen, the smoking revolver still raised, her arms locked. Tears streamed down her face, but her hand was steady. She had done it. She had killed a man. She had saved the man who saved her. Kane rolled onto his side, clutching his bleeding shoulder. He looked at her, his face pale with pain, but his eyes were filled with a fierce, burning pride. You all right? He managed to ask through clenched teeth. She gave a shaky nod, then slowly she lowered the gun. Her knees gave out, and she scrambled to his side, pressing her hands against the wound, trying to stop the bleeding. His blood soaked her fingers, hot and slick. I didn't think, she whispered, her voice trembling. You did just fine, he gasped, a grimace of pain on his face. He reached up with his good hand and touched her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear. You saved my life, Eliza. She shook her head, a sob catching in her throat. You saved mine first. And in that moment, surrounded by blood and sand and the dying light of the sun, she leaned down and rested her forehead against his. There was no more running, no more doubt, no more fear. The world had tried its best to break them both, but it had failed. It had only succeeded in forging them into something new, something stronger, something that would fight back. The abandoned Durham No. 7 mine was a black maw in the side of the mountain, a place the world had forgotten. The timbers at its entrance were rotted, the rails rusted and half buried in sand. It smelled of coal dust, damp earth, and ghosts. It was perfect. Eliza half carried, half dragged the feverish Kane into the oppressive darkness. His skin was burning, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps. The bullet was still in his shoulder, and the wound was festering. If she didn't get it out soon, the fever would kill him. She found a relatively dry spot on a wooden platform left behind by the miners and laid him down gently, covering him with their last blanket. By the low, flickering light of a single lantern, the mine looked like the belly of some great, dead beast. We can't stay here, Kane mumbled, his eyes glassy. They'll find us. You're going to rest now, she said, her voice firm, leaving no room for argument. No more moving. She took out his knife, sterilized the blade in the lantern's flame, and took a deep breath. She had stitched torn clothes before, but never flesh and blood. He gritted his teeth, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the platform. But he didn't make a sound as she probed the wound, her fingers clumsy but determined. Finally she found it, a flattened piece of lead lodged against bone. She worked it out, her stomach churning, and then set about stitching the ragged flesh together. He passed out before she was finished. She cleaned her hands, reloaded both revolvers, and checked the Winchester. Then she began to explore the mine. In a far corner, shoved behind a pile of rotting crates, she found it. A miracle, or a curse. Dynamite. A half-dozen sticks, old and sweating nitroglycerin, but still viable. And beside it, coils of fuse. An idea, cold and desperate, began to form in her mind. She worked quickly, her hands sure and steady. She laid a string of charges in the lower shaft, the one that led deeper into the mountain. She connected them with a single fuse line, then ran the line back up toward the entrance. She left only one path open into the main chamber where Kane lay unconscious, a narrow bottleneck, just wide enough for men to enter in single file. She was positioning the last stick when Kane's voice, weak and raspy, echoed from the darkness. "What are you doing, Eliza?" She turned, her face smudged with dirt and determination. "They'll come for us," she said, her voice echoing in the vast chamber. "They always do, but this time, we'll be ready." "This is my fight," he began, but she cut him off. "No," she said, walking back to him and kneeling by his side. "You said I needed to learn how to shoot. You never said I couldn't learn how to fight. This is our fight now." She kissed his hot forehead. "You just stay with me. That's all you have to do." An hour passed. 2. The silence in the mine was absolute, broken only by Kane's ragged breathing. Then she heard it, the crunch of boots on gravel outside. Voices, low and cautious. They were here. She crept to the entrance, hiding in the deep shadows, the end of the fuse clutched in one hand, a match in the other. "He's got to be in here," a man's voice barked. "He's wounded. Can't have gone far." "What about the girl?" another asked. "Forget the girl. Croft's new orders are clear. Grave hand is the priority. 5,000 for his head." Eliza's eyes narrowed. Her hand didn't shake. She let the first 2 men pass the entrance, their flashlights cutting uselessly through the oppressive dark of the main shaft. The moment their boots hit the inner track, she struck the match. The fuse hissed to life, a tiny sputtering snake of fire. 1 second. 2. The mine roared. The blast was apocalyptic. It felt like the mountain itself was tearing apart. A wave of fire, rock, and smoke erupted from the lower shaft, a hungry beast devouring everything in its path. The screams of the men were cut off almost instantly, swallowed by the thunderous collapse of rock and timber. The shock wave threw Eliza back, her head smacking against the stone wall. The lantern went out, plunging her into absolute blackness. Dust and acrid smoke filled her lungs, making her choke and gag. When the last of the rocks had fallen, a terrifying silence descended once more. "Kane!" she screamed, her voice raw. She scrambled through the darkness, her hands finding him on the platform. "Kane, wake up, please!" His skin felt cold now, too cold. His breathing was shallow, a faint flutter against her ear. "Don't you dare," she whispered, her voice breaking. She wrapped her arms around him, holding him close, trying to warm him with her own body. "Don't you leave me. Not now." Tears, hot and furious, streamed down her cheeks. "I will not let you die. Not while I'm still breathing." His eyes fluttered open, just barely. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Told you not to stay." "And I told you I'd choose," she sobbed, kissing his face, his lips, his hands. "Stay with me, Kane. Please. Just stay." His fingers brushed against hers, a weak but definite pressure. "Not going anywhere." And they lay there together in the suffocating darkness of the collapsed mine, their pursuers buried under tons of rock, their own future as uncertain as the next breath. She had buried his past for him. She had chosen to fight. And in the black, silent heart of the earth, she held on to him, refusing to let go, her fierce, stubborn love, the only light left in the world. Kane awoke to a world of gray light and silence, the kind of profound stillness that follows a storm. Soft morning light filtered through the latticework of collapsed timbers that now sealed the entrance to the mine. The air was cool and still tasted of dust, but the oppressive blackness was gone. He tried to shift, and a deep, throbbing ache flared in his shoulder. The pain was a dull anchor, a reminder of how close he had come to the edge. But he was alive. His fever had broken. Then he saw her. Eliza was asleep, sitting up with her back against the stone wall beside him. Her head had slumped to the side, but her hands were still wrapped around his, a fierce, protective grip that she hadn't loosened even in sleep. Her face was smudged with soot, and a smear of dried blood traced a line near her temple. But her expression was peaceful. He watched her for a long time, this woman who had stared down a lynch mob, who had killed to protect him, who had brought a mountain down on their enemies. This woman who had, against all odds, saved him from himself. She stirred, her eyes fluttering open. When she saw he was awake and watching her, a slow, radiant smile spread across her face. It was the first time he had ever seen her truly smile, and it hit him with the force of a physical blow. "You're awake," she said, her voice soft and scratchy. I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure you'd still be here." He tried to speak, but his throat was as dry as the desert sand. He swallowed and managed to rasp, "Told you, not going anywhere." A shaky breath escaped her, half laugh, half sob. They sat in the quiet for a long time, the silence speaking volumes. The world outside, with its bounty hunters and vengeful land barons, felt a million miles away. In this tomb that had become their sanctuary, there was only the two of them. "If there's no one left to pay you," she asked softly, her thumb brushing against the back of his hand. "If there's no contract, no debt, no target, then who are you, Kane?" The question struck him deep and true. He had been a soldier, a lawman, a bounty hunter, a killer. For 5 years he had been nothing but a vessel for vengeance. He looked past her, at the slivers of blue sky visible through the rubble. Who was he, without the hate that had driven him for so long? He looked back at her, at the fierce, unwavering loyalty in her eyes. And for the first time in a very long time, he knew the answer. "I'm the man who loves you," he said, his voice thick with emotion he thought he had long since buried. Eliza didn't flinch. She didn't look surprised. She just looked at him as if she had known all along, and had only been waiting for him to know it too. Her voice dropped to a whisper, a promise meant only for him. "And I'm the woman who loves you back." His fingers, weak but steady, curled around hers, their hands fitting together as if they had been carved from the same stone. "I won't let you regret it," he vowed. "I already don't," she replied. In the wreckage of the mine, surrounded by the ghosts of their past, they found their future. They still had a fight ahead of them. Silas Croft was still out there, but they would face him together. Not as a gunslinger and a fugitive, but as two people who had found each other in the darkest of places and had chosen to walk into the light, hand in hand. They found what they were looking for in the deepest, most secure part of the mine, in a small iron box tucked away behind a false wall in what must have been the foreman's office. Abernathy's ledger. It was all there. Every illegal land grab, every bribed official, every murder Croft had ordered to build his empire, including the fire that had killed Kane's family. It was the proof they needed. It was the weapon that would finally bring him down. Getting out of the mine was another challenge. The main entrance was hopelessly blocked, but Kane, remembering old mining layouts, knew there had to be ventilation shafts. After hours of searching, they found one, a narrow, crumbling chimney of rock leading straight up to the surface. It was a hard, treacherous climb, especially with his wounded shoulder. But Eliza went first, testing every handhold, her voice a constant stream of encouragement from above. And when he faltered, her hand was there, reaching down, pulling him up. They emerged into the blinding sunlight, blinking like creatures born in darkness. They were battered, bruised, and covered in dirt, but they were alive, and they were free, and they had a reckoning to deliver. They didn't ride back to Dry Creek. They went to the territorial capital, to the one man Kane knew Croft couldn't buy, a hanging judge by the name of Isaac Parker. They laid the ledger on his desk, and Judge Parker's eyes grew colder and harder with every page he turned. When he was done, he looked up at them. "This is enough to hang him 10 times over," he said. "Warrants will be issued for Silas Croft and every man on his payroll, including Sheriff Rudd of Dry Creek." He paused, looking at Eliza. "And a full pardon will be issued for you, Miss Miller. Your name will be cleared." The justice Kane had sought for 5 long years was finally at hand. But there was one last thing to do. The border town of Loretto was a place where people went to forget. It was built on second chances and unspoken pasts. On the edge of town, beneath a crooked mesquite tree, stood a small adobe cafe with a hand-painted sign swinging in the breeze. The faded letters read, "Eliza's Place." Kane hammered the last nail into a new window shutter as the morning sun warmed the porch. The smell of strong coffee and baking bread drifted out from inside. Eliza moved behind the counter, an apron tied around her waist, a smudge of flour on her cheek, humming a quiet tune. Their life was simple now. It was quiet. It was shared in small smiles and silent glances that said everything that needed to be said. They had found peace. The door creaked open, and a man stepped inside. He was tall and dust-stained, with the hard eyes of a man who had seen too much. The cafe went quiet. "I'm looking for a man," the stranger said, his voice a low drawl. "Goes by the name Kane. Used to be a gunslinger. A bounty hunter." Kane stopped his hammering. He didn't turn around. Eliza stepped forward from behind the counter. She didn't reach for the shotgun she kept under it. She just looked the man square in the eye. "That man," she said, her voice clear and steady, "doesn't live here anymore." The stranger looked from her to the back of the man on the porch. He saw the way Kane stood, the quiet confidence that had replaced the coiled tension of a killer. He saw the peace in Eliza's eyes. He saw the simple hand-painted sign above the door. He seemed to understand. He gave a slow nod, turned, and walked back out, the door swinging shut behind him. Kane finally turned and looked at Eliza. A small, real smile touched his lips. He walked inside, wiping his hands on his pants, and came to stand before her. She reached up and gently touched the scar on his neck. "He was sent to kill me," she said softly, her eyes full of a love that was as fierce and resilient as she was. "But he chose to save me." Kane leaned down and rested his forehead against hers. "And in the end," he whispered, his voice full of a gratitude that would last a lifetime, "I chose him, not just to live, but to finally feel alive." If this story of a love forged in fire and a justice earned in blood resonated with you, if you believe that even in the harshest wilderness, redemption can be found, then you found your tribe. This is where the stories of the untamed heart are told. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for more tales of grit, passion, and survival from the Wild West. Every week we bring you a new story where the heroes are flawed, the villains are ruthless, and love is the most dangerous game of all. Let us know in the comments below. What would you have done if you were in Eliza's place? Thanks for riding with us. We'll see you on the next trail.